Mark and his dear wife for being here today. I encourage you to continue to have some fellowship with them as they're here. Mark will probably say some more. I think he has some books in the back, so he'll mention those things, and then again give the presentation as you can see on the Reformed Baptist Network. But let's have a word of prayer, and then I'll have Mark come and he can take the rest of the time. Father, thank you once again for our time here together. We do thank you so much for the gospel. And we thank you that we can indeed say with all our hearts that it is well with our soul as we hear and believe and rely on and rest in the gospel. We are so thankful for those truths. And that when it comes down to everything, and any of the doubts that might assail us, we can indeed say that all I have and all I need is Christ. We rejoice in these truths this morning. Father, would you be with this Sunday School Hour now? As Brother Mark presents Reformed Baptist Network, we do thank you for the blessing the network has been to our church specifically, the encouragement that we find among other pastors, our dear brothers. And we pray that you would now give wisdom and good even discussion to follow. And might your will be done, we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, Ben. I've really appreciated Ben and his ministry to the network. We met together for a General Assembly in Coconut Creek, Florida, and Ben led a group forum discussion on the theme of, say, justice and protection in the context of the church, because there can be issues of child abuse that can take place in churches, and Ben's input was really helpful in that. And we just appreciate the way in the Reformed Baptist Network we are assembling together a band of mighty men and women that we might extend the gospel to the ends of the earth. And we have some literature in the back there. We have our Reformed Baptist Network Statement of Core Values. You can pick one of those up in the back. And also Reformed Baptist Network Purpose, Reasons, Focus, and Vision. And the text that we use as our keynote text is Habakkuk 2:14. For the earth will be filled of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And you think of how the desert-like wilderness of the earth being inundated with the pure, bubbling, flowing gospel. That's really our hope, that Christ's gospel will get all the way to the ends of the earth. I'm so thankful it got to my parched and starved and thirsting soul. And there are souls out there that need to hear the gospel, and that's what we're about as the gospel network of churches, the Reformed Baptist Network. I was made the coordinator of the Reformed Baptist Network in October of last year. You know Gordon Taylor, because Gordon Taylor used to be a member of this church, right? Gordon Taylor is a mighty man of God. Gordon Taylor is a prince of a man. He has huge shoes that I cannot fill. Would you please pray that I would be given grace and gift and ability and wisdom to be 1/10 the man that Gordon is, because he wonderfully blessed the network of churches. In fact, humanly speaking, no Gordon Taylor, there's no Reformed Baptist Network. He was able to be used by God to put things together, and we're so thankful for him. He's aging now. In fact, he is laboring in Lenox, Illinois, which is a little church. He's gone off to be the interim pastor. There was some breakdown that took place, and if ever there was a physician of the soul, it would be Gordon Taylor. And Lord willing, he could be down there and bring healing in that congregation. But I stand now as the coordinator of the network. In reality, I am still a pastor in Holland, Michigan, Harbor Reformed Baptist Church. I've been there for 27 years. But just let me give you a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of my background, because I'm sure I'm like a Melchizedek to you. No genealogy. No background. You don't know where I came from. So I was actually born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, way, way back there. I called Jeremiah Aaron, right? I got it wrong. I apologize. But I was born, let me tell you how old I was when I was born, Aaron. I was born in 1959. That's a long time ago. So you do the math. I'm an old man. And I was raised in a Roman Catholic church, Roman Catholic family. We were so Roman Catholic that my mother vowed that she would name all of her children either Joseph or Mary, because those are two of the key saints in the Roman Catholic pantheon to whom we pray, Joseph or Mary. So firstborn, Gregory Joseph, my older brother. Secondborn, David Joseph Chansky, my older brother. Thirdborn, that's me, Mark Joseph. There's a pattern here, isn't there? Chansky. Fourthborn, Christopher Joseph Chansky. And then the lastborn was my baby sister, Mary, see, Mary and Joseph? Mary Jo Chansky is her name. So mom kept her vow. I just say that because my mom was really Roman Catholic. My dad as well. I'm frankly thankful for the Roman Catholic upbringing that I had, in the sense that it gave me a sense of right and wrong, the sense of there was a God in heaven to whom I was accountable. I understood discipline. The text says, he who spares the rod hates his son. He who loves him is careful to discipline him. My dad loved me. And I can remember he was a mailman. And he'd sit at the table, and the four sons at the table. And all Dad sometimes would do is, if we were getting inappropriate in our talking to Mom, just loosen that black belt, and everything was silent. Because I am thankful for the discipline. It was just discipline. It was loving discipline. And I praise God for my daddy in the way that he taught me things in my youth. I look at the generations being raised up today, and it is such a lack that's present. So I was raised in that Roman Catholic context, and my view was, as long as I did more goods than bads on Judgment Day, the scales would tip in my favor. You can get into heaven. But I was so wrong. And I went to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp when I was 17 years old at the University of Central Michigan. And there I heard the gospel on a Friday night after 4 or 5 days of preaching. And I couldn't stop crying as I was walking from Rose Arena to my dormitory. And all the other dozen guys who were with us from Creston Public High School in Grand Rapids said, "What's the matter with Chansky? Why is Chansky crying?" I didn't know, but I knew that I'd come into contact with a Savior who could forgive me of my sins. And it wasn't until a couple, 3 years later, when I was actually at Cornerstone University and a guy taught on justification by faith, and I fully comprehended what that forgiveness meant. And you know, it's like the Lord Jesus healing that blind man, putting the spittle on the eyes, and he saw men as trees walking. But then the second application, he saw clearly. It's like in 76 when I was saved, and it was maybe in 78 when I understood doctrine more clearly. That's the way the Lord worked in my life. And I first wanted to be a psychologist, where I could have a practice, where I'd have a group of people who would be my patients, and I would give them truths that would encourage them. But instead, I realized it's really the gospel, like I just preached. It's the ultimate encouragement, isn't it? But there's a book back there. It's called Encouragement, Adrenaline for the Soul. That came out about a year ago. And in fact, one of the ladies was here and said, "That sermon you preached, do you have a copy of that somewhere?" And there's really in that book. And the 5th chapter is really where that sermon came from. But the point is, I realized to be a pastor is to bring the great physician's truths to the souls of his creatures. And so just preaching the word, line on line, precept on precept. When I was about 20 years old, I resolved that I should be a pastor instead of be a psychologist. And so just preaching the word. Oh, by the way, I met my wife, Diane, off at Cornerstone University. Listen to this one, Donnie. Donnie, right? I was in the library, and I was studying John Gill and his systematic theology, and someone tapped me on the shoulder. And I looked up, there were these two beautiful blue eyes, Donnie. And she said, "Could I borrow your highlighter?" It was Diane, who's now my wife, We kind of went out a little bit, and then she dumped me, and a year and a half later, we got back together. That's a long story. Christina could tell you that, because we talked about it last night. But then we have 5 children, age 37 to 27, and I went off to be a pastor in Dayton, Ohio. So I was a Buckeye. I really wasn't, but I pretended to be for 3.5 years. And then I came back to Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was my home church, and we started planting churches in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Louisville, Kentucky, Lethbridge, Alberta, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and then we thought we'd plant one in Holland, Michigan. So in 1994, that church was planted 27 years ago. I've been the pastor there ever since. I'm still a pastor of that church, but now half-time coordinator. So I'm straddling 2 responsibilities, and even God willing, I hope to stay as a pastor there. But we have another man named Peter Banfi, who's been brought on to our church staff to be the lead pastor and lion's share preacher in days to come. Please pray for Peter Banfi at our church. Let me just hit some highlights here regarding the network. The network, let's see, we started in Boulder, Colorado, pondering how we could gather together to be a group of churches who could take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And by the way, being a group of churches, Gordon Taylor was the coordinator, and we're seeking to band together, as I said, mighty men. You ever seen, Donnie, you ever seen The Avengers? Aaron, Avengers, you've seen that movie? Well, Donnie's seen it. He will tell you about it. And it's a group of these superheroes, like there's the Hulk, there's Captain America, there's Iron Man, there's Hawkeye. Then there's an interesting character. Who's the guy who's kind of the leader of them all? He's got an eye patch. Nick Fury. Okay, Nick Fury. Gordon Taylor was the original Nick Fury, trying to gather together all these mighty men. I am Nick Fury too, trying to follow in Gordon's footsteps. So we want to band together men who can fight a good fight against the Prince of Darkness. And we're glad to have Ben. We're glad to have Mike Woody as well as men who help us fight together. So we got together in 2015. And we met in Rincon, Georgia to try to put together some Constitution material. And then we got together in Taylor, South Carolina, where we had our GA, and there we constituted together, writing up certain names. We had 26 churches that constituted together to be a part of the network. We had Mark Dever, who is from Capitol Hill Baptist Church. He was our keynote speaker, and we just said our desire is that the knowledge of the glory of the Lord would cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. We want to plant churches. We want to band together churches, strengthen churches like yours. I even hope like a visit like this from somebody else can be a breath of fresh air. And then maybe Gordon Taylor comes and visits, or maybe you'll get Nick Kennicott to come up and give you a little series on critical race theory and the Bible and the Word of God, and these things can all be helpful in encouraging each other. Then maybe your church is a smaller church, and you can't carry the weight of sending a missionary off to Vinakonda in India, but if you band together with 4 or 5 other churches, each of you, many hands make light work, you can get a missionary off there. Or if you want to together plant a church, maybe in Wapaka, Wisconsin. So you band together a few churches and you support someone, and there you plant a church. See, we can do this. Smaller churches working together. So we got together there in 2016, and then we met in 2017 at another GA in Grand Rapids, and then Riverside, California. And the interesting thing is, when you go to these different churches, you realize that we are not all clones of one another. There was a time in my view of church life when I had this really narrow-minded view and everybody had to do it my way or the highway, or they weren't really doing it God's way. But in reality, you realize that. I mean, look at the Apostle Paul's ministry when he preaches in Acts 14, say in Pisidian Antioch, he brings this sermon that's filled with all these intense Old Testament passages. Because why? He's preaching to a certain context. These are Jewish people who have a rich scriptural background, so his ministry is accordingly, contextually fitting. But then you look at him in Acts chapter 15, and he's preaching to those wild and woolly Gentiles out in Lystra, which is out in the hinterlands. And he doesn't preach a message that is characterized by intense Old Testament quotations, but he refers to general revelation, saying, I am preaching about the God who gives you the harvests and the sunshine and the bread to fill your bellies. It's different because it's a different context. And then Paul in Acts chapter 17 is preaching at the Areopagus in Athens on Mars Hill to those philosophers, those Greeks. And what does he do? He doesn't quote Old Testament scriptures. He doesn't chiefly quote general revelation, but he quotes these poets who are secular poets like Epimenides and Aratus. Why? You see, his ministry matches somewhat with the context. So you go to Riverside, California, wild and woolly. Riverside, California. It's not like straight-laced Holland, Michigan, Dutch background. People in Holland, Michigan maybe natively wear a tie and a suit, but you go off to Riverside, California, and you got a pair of sandals, Bermuda shorts, and a t-shirt. That's okay. They don't have to do it our way. And then when it comes to music. I mean, some people can say, no piano, no music. It's only straight psalm singing with the voice. But then someone brings in this wild piano. But that's okay. That's okay. It can be different. Then you realize, do you know what's inside this wild piano? You know what's in there? Strings. Did you know that? Could you imagine if someone actually had a guitar to worship? Is there a guitar over there? Well, what do you know? I think there was a time when I thought that maybe playing a guitar would be carnal and unsuitable. Who am I? Didn't David play a lyre? And so you go to Riverside, California, or you go to Vinaconda, India, or you go to Pretoria, South Africa, or you go to Lusaka, Zambia, or you go to Rome, Italy, or you go to Birmingham, England, or you go to Cubao, Philippines, and you realize, wow, people do things really dramatically differently than the way we do it in Holland, Michigan. See, we can be really narrow, can't we? That's one of the benefits of being part of a big network. Right. You're not all provincial and seeing things narrowly. You realize the kingdom is far bigger. And that's one of the things I learned in going to Riverside, California, a Reformed Baptist church. Robert Elliott is one of the pastors there. And so we cross-pollinate our churches, and this makes us wiser regarding what we're to be about as those who are in the kingdom. And then we went to 2019 to Coconut Creek, Florida. One of the pastors there is Jeff Smith. And Jeff is a delightful man, his wife Kelly, and they have multiple elders there in their church. And we had great fellowship together with many people. You notice in the front row here, I mentioned Nick Kennicott, who's pursuing a PhD. Look, Nick doesn't even have socks on here. What's up with that? But he's pursuing a PhD, and he's writing on critical race theory and how the biblical principles impinge on our analysis of that. Here's John Corty. He labors at 2 Indian reservations in Arizona. Chris Marley up in Prescott, Arizona. Steve Woodman at Arbor Baptist. I used to pastor that church in Kemp Road, Beaver Creek, Ohio, back in the day. So many brothers and sisters. Here's Robert Elliott right there. He is from the church in Riverside. Gordon Taylor. See Gordon Taylor right there. So yes, these are and I sense that our network is snowballing in size, and we're hoping that it would continue to grow so that we could do more work in the kingdom. We have a GA that was scheduled for last year in Chicopee, Massachusetts, but because of COVID, and Massachusetts was so tight in lockdown, and the expectations were really demanding. We didn't even meet. We plan on having Conrad there and David Campbell, Conrad from Zambia. But now this year we're having it not back to Chicopee because we just don't know what COVID is going to do. But we'll be in Jackson, Mississippi, and there's Grace Church of Newcastle, and they are going to be hosting the 2021 GA. This is the new front they plan on putting on the building that they're working on right now. And the GA we had the last year was in Sterling, Illinois. You see Gordon Taylor there, and Chris Bice is sitting to the far left. She is our secretary, my administrative assistant. There's even Raina sitting over there. And we had a handoff of the baton from Gordon to me. Notice my hand trembling there, receiving it. And beautiful album was given to Gordon and Raina, expressing appreciation for what they have done. Again, a prince and a princess in the kingdom, those two. There's my bride, Diane, there. Now that's the one, Donnie, who said, can I use the highlighter? And by the way, ladies, let me say this. Younger ladies, it's okay, or mothers, it's okay for a young lady to drop the hanky. Because men can be real blockheads. We don't get it, but dropping it, and that's another thing from the generation now where you have young ladies stalking young men, basically. But look at Ruth chapter 3 in the threshing floor when she mentions to Boaz, come and drop your skirt over me. And she was kind of dropping the hanky to Boaz, who was displaying a bit of blockheadedness at this time. I think there is something reasonable in doing that. So then Peter Banfi I mentioned, who is filling the gap back in in Holland, Michigan. Pray for Peter as he takes on that new role. Here's the ordination of Peter Banfi, even David Woolen on the far right, who is the CEO of Reformation Heritage Books, who does wonderful book publishing, and also John Heaney, another network church, they were just with us to display the Grand Rapids support and the Bremen, Indiana support. It's great to have other churches who are with us. We're not in this alone together as Peter was ordained. And then some of the adventures I've had since I've been the coordinator. Went off to the Gathering Church in Westchester, North Carolina. And there they have a vision to plant churches in the hollers of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a different culture. Again, like I said, Paul ministered in different cultures and places. You think of maybe in the technological triangle of the Raleigh-Durham area, you've got some really fast lane people, but getting the Appalachians is a totally different group of people. And when you drive in the winding roads through those mountains, you come to these hollers, and there'd be a town in a holler, then you got to wind around, and you almost have a church in every holler. So they want to plant churches there in these places, and this is Scott Day who has this vision, and these are various pastors from the area who got together with the idea of planting more churches. In fact, look at this guy here. Look at that long beard he's got there. That's a holler pastor. And we want to gather together men who will be planting these churches in these places. This is Gary Hendricks. Anyone ever heard of Gary Hendricks? Gary has been a pastor in Melbourne, North Carolina as of August. It was 50 years. Pastored the same church for 50 years. And Gary was retiring. But by September, Gary was dead because he got pancreatic cancer. And he thought, we have all these plans, don't we? When I get to this point and I retire, then I will. But the Lord had for Gary the shepherding of his flock. And when his 50 years were done, then his errand was done and he was taken home. But Gary was a really good friend of mine. We would talk for years on Tuesday afternoons. And again, this is fellowship, isn't it? Fellowship. Like even for me, it was an older man teaching a younger man. And we're hoping that your Pastor Ben would have fellowship with other pastors in the network. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. That's what we are laboring toward. This is a situation where these are our 4 elders of our church who are laying hands on this gentleman here whose name is Ottavio. And this was about, this was in October of last year, because in the network there was a missionary named Ken Wells who had planted a core church in northeastern Italy, in the mountains of Italy, in Udine. And Ken had been there for 3 or 4 years, but now Ken had to come back to the States. He needed someone to fill in to continue to pastor that church. So we thought, Dave, we had the perfect match, because Ottavio had come to Puritan Reformed Seminary in Grand Rapids. Then Ottavio had begun attending our church out in Holland. And then Ottavio struck up a romantic relationship with Heidi, and they got married. And then Ottavio was going to be sent off to 2 or 3 churches in the Virginia area where he was an intern. And then the Ken Wells thing popped, and Ottavio Polombaro is an Italian, born and raised in Italy. The perfect match, we thought. So we gathered funds and we sent him over to Udine. But as he got to Udine, frankly, within his being there about 3 months, the whole thing collapsed. See, I wish I could tell you all success stories when it comes to the kingdom, but all of them aren't successful as we would think. And this was very discouraging, and Ottavio was basically called off the mission field. But though there be discouragements along the way, I mean, wasn't Paul left stoned for dead outside of Derbe? But he got up and kept going, and that's what we're continuing to do, to get up and keep going. So our desire is to add churches. This is Jim Dom on the right, church in Englewood, New Jersey, and they are now joining the network officially at the coming GA in September. And this is Rob Ventura and Jack Phillips, who is his fellow pastor. And our desire is for Rob to join and others to join. This is also Mark Raines, who pastors a church in the shadow of Yale University in East Haven, Connecticut. Mark used to be a pastor alongside of me at the church in Holland. And then about 10 years ago, he left to go to this church. 10 years ago, girl? About that? Has it been that long? Maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago? And he's been there with his wife, Abigail. She's a Filipino, and they're in this real cosmopolitan area where people from Yale come from all over the world. We're hoping they will join as well, the network. This is a church in Louisville, Kentucky. Look at all those old people there. Back in, you ever watch Donnie, you ever see Chariots of Fire, that movie? Anybody see Chariots of Fire? Okay. There's a scene at the end where Chariots of Fire is about Eric Liddell, who won the 400 meters in the Olympics. It's also about Harold Abrams, who won the 100. All these young guys and their stories on the Olympic track and field. But at the end, there's this scene. Remember that scene? These old guys who are reminiscing about what happened, and they say, we ran them off their feet. They say, well, I feel like this because in about 1990, I said we planted a church in Louisville, Kentucky. So this is about 31 years ago we planted that church, and I've been back to Louisville, Kentucky every September since then to reminisce the planting of the church. It's a strong, it's a solid church, but these are some of those older people who back in the day we ran them off their feet for the cause of the kingdom. We're hoping Louisville will join us. This is the church in Englewood, New Jersey, and their elders. This is a church in near Flint, Michigan. It's called Berean Baptist Church. Pastor Eric Maynard. We're hoping they will be joining with us. This is a church in San Diego, California. Kurt Arend and Stephen Robinson. who are the pastors of the church there. And then this is Pastor Brian Borgman, Minden, Nevada. Really good. You want to listen to things on sermon audio that are really good? Listen to his sermons. Really great material, good expositional material that he brings. In fact, I was in Minden about 2 months ago, and one of the ladies in their church had done a musical instrumentation of an older hymn and kind of modernized it. Same old solid words and lyrics, but since we're in Nevada, it had almost the feel of a Native American war march. And there was someone who actually had percussion. You imagine the what do they call it? The war drums. And it was exhilarating to the heart. And I thought, how fitting. You talk about contextualizing something. How fitting that we, the people of God, are in a battle. We're fighting for the cause of King Jesus. Again, it's a blessed thing to cross-pollinate these churches. Also, they planted a church. They are in Minden, but they planted a church just to the north in Reno, and they had 60 people who left them. Imagine losing 60 people from your church to go out to plant a church maybe 30 miles away. And they did that. But then within about 4 months, those 60 chairs were refilled. That's the way the Lord works, it seems. You know, the proverb that says, the generous man will be made fat, and he who waters will himself be watered. Just ponder the implications of that. So planting churches is also another church that we are seeking to plant in Conway, South Carolina. Some guys from Conway, which is near Myrtle Beach, called and said, we want to plant a church, a Reformed Baptist church. What do we do? Well, we do have a sister church in Greenville, Taylor, South Carolina. And so we had them connect with them, and they got together some theological principles, and then they sent men down to Conway, and they started to meet. The facility is kind of like yours in some ways. It was an older church building. They painted it up, and they primed it up, and they worked on the gardens out front, and by the way, I really like the way that this looks on the inside here. It's very neat, and these chairs, and I just think you come into this place, it's very, very well done, really well done. The way that you've presented things. I think a visitor coming in really says, this is like a nicely pressed suit. Very, very, very well done here. May God give you wisdom in moving forward in this. But anyway, they're doing that in Conway, and pray that little church would grow and flourish. And there are 2 other new churches in South Carolina that are in the process of revitalizing and being planted. This is David Woolen, as I mentioned, Reformation Heritage Books. He's an elder in the Grand Rapids Church, but Puritan Reformed Seminary. They have Reformation Heritage Books connected with them, and it's really part of the wing of what we do in giving out truth. Also, Aaron Hoke from Grace Baptist Church in Warsaw, Indiana. They joined us last year. Pastor Don Thomas, Redeeming Grace, Cody, Wyoming. They joined us last year. In fact, out in Wyoming, really Powell, Wyoming, was a Reformed Baptist church. They planted the church about 3 years ago in Cody. There's another church they planted out in, Warlogan in Wyoming. So you've got this triangle of churches there in Wyoming that were from one church. So could it be that maybe Woodstock would be a part of planting churches in northern Illinois, into Wisconsin? I said, Waupaca, Wisconsin. Who knows what you might do as a church. David Vaughn is a real man after God's own heart. A delightful, godly man. He's preached at our GAs. Pray for him and his wife, Nikki, as they labor there in the hard ground. You talk about a burned over area where atheism has set in. Pray for David Vaughn. Also, you know where Texas is, and way to the west, South Texas, is El Paso, Texas, on the border. And just across the border, if you've been in El Paso at night, you can see all the lights that are across the border. It's Juarez, which is, I think, like 1 to 2 million people in Juarez. This is a church that's been planted, a Reformed Baptist church in Juarez. Pray for Raul and Lydia Torres there. Then the chaplaincy in the military. We presently have 2 chaplains, James Gallion and Josh Stoley. And it's challenging to minister in the military now. You just imagine the obstacle course you have to run and the minefield. Think of this, as Josh was saying to me, he said, okay, let's say that one of my soldiers come to me as a chaplain, military, supported by the government chaplain. You know how the government is really against things Christian, and anytime we take a stand for truth and a stand for righteousness and a stand for Jesus is the way, the truth, the life, no man comes to the Father except through me, that's very dicey territory for a chaplain to be dealing with a whole group of soldiers from a spectrum of background. So he says, what if one of the soldiers come to me and says, I've got a problem in my relationship with my wife. Should I give marriage counseling to them? I said, well, sure, of course. Well, what if another soldier comes and it's not his wife, but it's his girlfriend? They're living together. Should I give counseling to them? You realize I could actually tell them that it's wrong, and if I tell them it's wrong and sinful in that relationship, maybe they could go to their commander, and then I could end up getting court-martialed because of this. And I say, yeah, I think it would be wise to counsel a soldier and the live-in. He says, what about this one? If a soldier comes to me and he wants me to counsel with him and his live-in man friend because they're homosexuals, should I give counseling to that? Just imagine the obstacle course you've got to be shrewd as a serpent, innocent as a dove. But you realize how influential that time in the military can be for soldiers. Now, I talked about, hey, when I was young and 17, I went to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp. When we're young, we're vulnerable to the gospel. This is a great field that's white unto harvest in the military, isn't it? So we want a whole stable full of chaplains, God willing, someday, to have in the network to help these men get together and assist each other and counsel each other. How can we minister in this difficult field that God has given to us? So pray for that. Keep that in mind. This is another missionary who labors off in North Africa in a country where, if you're not careful, you lose your head. We can't even give his name. He goes off and he has a ministry where he is stealth, he's undercover. He's a missionary for Christ, but he's got his business, which is a kind of a tour agent business where he has tourists come in and then he'll give them tours throughout the country as a whole group of people who help give tours. And let's say that you, Dave, let's say that you and Julie decided you were going to go to this country in North Africa on vacation, and you connected with this missionary, and so now you were going to take the tour. And as you take the tour, you're a tourist, remember? You can say anything you want. And he can then be the translator. And because he's the translator, translating what you want to say, he can say anything he wants. And he can be the mouthpiece bringing the gospel, and he can say all these theologically orthodox biblical truths, but he's not violating any principle. He's not somehow abusing the local laws, because I'm just telling what the tourist wants to say. And so when bartering back and forth at a shop for a blanket or just interacting with people, and then, by the way, that missionary can expand on what you say the way he might want to say. And he even makes some money in his tourist business. So this isn't your grandfather's missionary. It's a different way. We need to, again, be shrewd as a serpent, innocent as a dove, and ministering to different places around the world. Because we have to, you know how in the Revolutionary War, the redcoats all marched in squares down the road, whereas the colonists were kind of like guerrilla warfare, hiding behind trees. I think we've got to modify the way that we do missions and be wise in what we do. This is a brother who labors also in Oman. And he's kind of undercover himself, and they are sent out by the church in Dayton or really Kettering, Ohio. They labor among the Muslim people. Our brother Aaron, he looks somewhat like a Muslim himself with his dark complexion. And then here's Ben and Abby Killian. They labor at Africa Christian University, and he has taken on the role of being a professor at Africa Christian University. You ever heard of Hillsdale College? In West Michigan and East Michigan, and this college is a place that wants to create Christians who are godly citizens, who will be salt and light in education, in politics, in government. That's what they're trying to do in Zambia. To do. That's the church or the university Vodi is, that's right. Vodi is functioning there as the president of that university. And then Baruch Ma'oz, he'll be preaching at our upcoming GA in Jackson, Mississippi. And he labored in Israel for about 40 years. And now he's in the States, and he's writing commentaries in Hebrew. A mighty man of God. I could go on and on, but our time is basically gone. I got about 2 minutes, sorry about that, for questions. Any questions you might have? Brief, yes, Aaron.
What about the books in the back?
The books in the back? Well, I do have a few books back there of that it's called Encouragement, Adrenaline for the Soul. And I think they're marked at 50% off if you'd like to have that. And then there are pamphlets in the back too regarding the Reformed Baptist Network. You can pick those up. Anything else that you might have? Yes.
I just want to make a comment. I really appreciate the missionary newsletters that we get every month, and then also the other RBNet news and stuff like that. And it's really neat, this presentation, because now I can see, I can put a face with the names and everything like that.
Yes.
So just praise the Lord
Thank you for
it.
that.
And you know what? Just go online and print it out for yourself. I mean, it's just, it's a real blessing.
We post it to our website, and every month I create a link to the Reformed Baptist Network, and so it's out there. We have both the RBNet News as well as the main mission prayer list, as well as missionary updates. Those are all out there in sections on our website. You can go out there and find those.
Yes, you're not isolated in Woodstock, Illinois.
Exactly.
You're interconnected with the rest of us throughout the country and throughout the world. Don?
So when you look at other congregations that might want to join RBNet, what does the process look like for you? How do you decide if someone is right? Because obviously it's a two-way street. People want people to join RBNet, but you also want to make sure that they're people who are truly Reformed Baptists. And so what is kind of the process that you use to make sure that it's a good fit all the way around?
Yes, basically we use the 1689 Baptist Confession as the yardstick of measuring. And the confession gives those general doctrines that we would all hold together with a kindred spirit. If we're going to plant a church somewhere, or we're going to send a missionary somewhere, multiple churches together, we have to know that we're building by the same blueprint. So that's the 1689 confession. And so there are churches, and we ask them about your embracing the 1689. Now understanding, we call for not what's called for strict subscription, what's called substantial subscription. Like one of the paragraphs say that the Pope is the Antichrist. It says that in 1689. Now our church has etched that out, and we don't embrace that paragraph. And so we look at a church that might not embrace that. But the other one, there's another paragraph that talks about elect infants who die in infancy. And there are issues we could talk about, but that's complex. But then even the issue of like the Lord's Day. And one of the paragraphs speaks about acts of piety, mercy, necessity, and recreations. And again, you go to Riverside, California, you go to Minden, Nevada, you go to Coconut Creek, Florida, or Holland, Michigan. All churches don't do everything exactly alike. There's not one uniform way. So even like that paragraph, there's a sense of latitude that we give. That maybe that paragraph could have been written in a different way. But there are other paragraphs we'd say, hey, no, this is really central. This is really core, not just something on the periphery. So we look for what's called, Donnie, substantial subscription to the confession. That's basically the yardstick. And again, we like to also know people. So we have a pastor or pastors come to a general assembly so that they can rub shoulders with each other. Well, the time has been really insightful to me and enjoyable to connect with you. And may the Lord bless. It's called Covenant Baptist Church.
Covenant Reformed Baptist Church.
Covenant Reformed Baptist Church of Woodstock, Illinois. May the Lord bless you and keep you and turn his face towards you and grant you peace. May he lift up the valleys and level the mountains before you. Amen. May he cause his face to shine on yours, and may in your running this race, may his wind be at your back. Let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father, we thank you for the fellowship that we can have together, this church with other churches. I pray that you would fetch glory for yourself through us.